Welcome back everybody. In this video, we are going to bringing in the tubes in our Flappy board column. So now we have got our background and our board moves just how we want them to go up and down like that. Wonderful. The next thing to add is the tubes. So I'm going to start by creating texture for them. So we are going to have a texture called top tube and call texture bottom tube. We'll do two stuff together in create method here. So top tube is going to be a new texture from top tube PNG, and bottom tube is also going to be a next texture, of course this time bottom tube PNG. Alright, so now let's add them in, and we'll add them here after the game state is not 0, the game state is active. So we'll need to start a batch begin, then I'll just add the batch in command there as well. And then as before we need batch draw and texture, I'll start with the top tube. Now let's think about where we want to put this. So we want the x coordinate first. So the top tube, we want the bottom left to be around here. So if there's the center of the screen, we want to shift it up by half of the whatever the gap is going to be. So we have got the gap between the two tubes there. So if this is the center of the screen, we want it shift up by half of the gap and left by half of the width of the tube, so that we'll keep it center. So if we get the center of the screen, which we get from gdx.graphics.getWidth, so that's the width of the screen, and we divide that by 2 to get the center of the screen, and then we want to subtract the width of the tube, so that top tube dot get width divided by 2. So that's the x coordinate. The y coordinator is fairly similar. We are going to get gdx dot graphics dot get height, and we want to divide that by 2, and we want to add half of the gap. Now the gap is something that we might want to alert or make the game easier or harder. So I'm going to create that as float, and I will start off with it 500 and see how that works out. So we want half of the gap. Alright, and we don't need to specify the width and height because we can just use the default width and height of the sprite themselves. And then very similar for the bottom tube. Batch draw bottom tube. So the x coordinate is going to be exactly the same. So gdx.graphics.getWidth divided by 2, and we'll use bottom tube dot get height divided by 2. Even though they both have the same width, it doesn't really matter. The y coordinate is going to be a bit different, because for top tube we want the bottom left to be around here. For the bottom tube, the bottom left is exactly going to be way off the bottom of the screen. So we are going to want to get to the center them, subtract half the gap to move half the gap down, and then subtract the height of the tube to take us to the bottom left of the tube, which is going to be way down here somewhere. So we get that using gdx.graphics.getHeight and divide by 2, gap divide by 2, again the height of the tube, so subtract bottom tube.getHeight. And just before we run that, we are going to have one issue here, and that is the background is drawn after the tube, and because the background is full screen, that's going to be on top of the tubes. So we don't actually see the tubes at all. So that's not good. So what I'm going to do is actually begin the batch, cut and paste right at the beginning here. And then we'll draw the background first, and then we just use the same batch here to draw the tubes. So delete batch.begin and batch int as well. So then we are drawing background first, and then the tube, and then the board. The board is never going to be on top of the tubes anyway, so that doesn't really matter. But even if it was, we did properly want the board to be in front of the tubes. So quick summary there. The order that you draw those is in the order that they will be displayed or layered onto the screen. So run and let's have a look. And there you go. There's our flopping board and tubes. Wonderful. And I'll keep that distance as 500 for the moment. When we play the game, we might adjust it, but that looks good to me. Now next thing we are going to need is to randomize the position of the tubes. We don't want them to be central every time. We want them to shift up and down. The tricky question is how much do we want to move them up and down? Where you want to use the full height of the screen. But we obviously don't want them off the top of the screen. So what I'm going to do is consider this to be half of the gap, and then say another 100 for that bit there, because we don't want that bit to be off the screen. So then the maximum amount that we want to be move them up from the center point is going to be half of the height of the screen, which will take them right to the top minus half of the gap, and then that 100 for this top bit here. So that was half of the height of the screen minus half of the gap minus 100. So let's set up that. So that's going to be float maximum offset. So the amount is moved up and down, and we'll set here, and we'll set up here as well. So maximum offset, as I said, it was going to be half of the height of the screen. So gdx.graphics.getHeight divide by 2, subtract gap divide by 2, and another subtract 100. And then we are going to need a random number generator to generate our random gap. So let's set up that. I'll call it random. Bring that in. So down here, what I'm actually going to do, temporarily I create a new random number every time the screen is tapped, and then we'll see that it is random moving up and down. But then we'll move that code to somewhere better later on, because we don't want to move the tubes every time the screen is tapped in the final game. So let's have a float tube offset, and we're going to set that here after the velocity tube offset, and we want to random generator. We have actually set up our random generator, so let's do that here. It is just going to be a random generator, and then we have to create a float from that random generator. And remember, tube offset random generator dot next float, create a random number between 0 and 1. So first off, we want to not have a number between 0 and 1, but we want to have a number between a half and minus a half, because we are working from the center of the screen here. So I'm going to take my random number generator and subtract 0.5 from it. I need to specify that 0.5 is float so that the type are not problem. So now we have got a random number between 0.5 and minus 0.5. We want to multiply that by kind of scale factor as it will. So remember, we want our maximum value to be half of the top of the screen minus half of the gap minus 100. Now we have already got a half here, because the maximum of this is 1/2. So if we get the top of the screen That's gdx.graphics.getHeight, and then subtract the gap. So this will mean that if this has a maximum value of 1/2, then the maximum value of the whole things is going to be half of the height minus the gap, which is almost what we want, but we want it to be half of the height minus the gap minus 100. So we are going to need to minus an extra 200 there, because remember we are multiplying by a half here, so this will give us a minimum possible value of this time, a half minus this, a half minus that time, a half, and a minimum value of the negative of all of that. So in short, we are going to go from the center of the screen and we are going to move up to around there. So the top of the screen minus the gap and minus 100 pixel. Alright, so that's our tubes offset. So all we need to do is add that to each of the y coordinate here, so that we'll shift it up or down depending on where the random number here is more or less than a half. So now every time we tap, that should give us a new tubes offset. So we should see those tubes moving up and down with each tap. Let's run and take a look. Here we go. First tap, excellent, and then wonderful. They are shifting up and down perfectly, and they are not going to high and they are not going to low. Alright, the last thing that we are going to create those tubes to do is move right to left. So let's set up that. I'm going to create a float tube velocity equal 4, and I'll try this out. The tube velocity of 4 should work out. And then we are going to need to keep track of the tube x coordinate, because that's going to change as it is moving left. So I'll call that float tube x, and then initially we want to set tube x to be our this code here, which was our initial x coordinate. So that's tube x now, and same with this. And then let's see what happened is each time we decrease tube x by 4. And actually what I'm going to do is again raise tube x each time we tap just, so that we can bring the tube back into the middle and a good look at when we want to. Let's run and have a look. Here you go. We tap and there it is, moving out when I think is a perfect good speed to the left. So now we have got our tube more or less behaving as we like. That what you are probably thinking is, how are we going to create more than one tube? I'm going to have 4 sets of tubes, so top and bottom, and I'm going to move them from the right to the left, and then when they are off the screen to the left, I'm going to change their x position so that they jump back to the right of the screen, and that will look like an unlimited infinite set of tubes coming from the right to the left. But actually there's only 4 of them, and I have chosen 4 just because if you are playing this one a big screen, then you might be able to see lots of tubes at once. On this screen we probably get away with or maybe even 2, but I'm going to go with 4 just to be safe. And I'm also going to put them half a screen width apart, and if I do that, then we should not have any problem missing tubes or not enough tubes to display to the user. Alright, so let's have a couple more variables. So I'll have a number of tubes as a variable, and that's going to be 4. And actually use my tube velocity here rather than number. Let's fix that using by tube velocity. So a number of tubes is 4. plot distance between tubes. So here we can set up the distance between tubes as I said half of the width of the screen. So distance between tubes equal gdx.graphics.getWidth and divide by 2. Alright. Now let's create these tubes. So some of these we are going to need to change them slightly. So we are not going to have just one tube X. Now we are going to have 4. So I'm going to make this an array of float, and this is going to be a float array tube X equal new float array, and then the tube size, or in fact we could use size number of tubes, and it doesn't like that because I need number of tubes to be an integer. Alright, similarly the offset are going to be different for each pair of tubes, so let's make those an array as well. Alright, so then down here we are going to set up our tubes. So I'm going to do this is a for loop. So we have an I will start at 0 and less than the number of tubes, and each time is increment. So for each pair of tubes, initially we want to set their x coordinate and their offset. For I equal 0, I less than number of tubes, and I each time increment. So let's now bring our code out of the just torch method and into the create method. So instead of tube offset, now we are using tube offset I, and similarly tube X I, and so that first one the offset, that's absolutely fine as it is because we want to each one to be random, but this one we don't want each to have same x coordinate. We want for now the first one to have that x coordinate because we want it to appear in the middle of the screen. So we can see it's slightly away, but for each one we are going to want to multiply I by the distance between the two. So the first one is going to be in the center, the second one is going to be half a screen away because distance between the tubes in half a screen. The third one's going to be a whole screen away, and then fourth is going to be 1 and a half screen away. Alright, so that should now create our necessary tubes. So let's now display all of those tubes. So I'm going to copy this for loop because I want exactly the same for loop here. There you go, and instead of tube X we want tube Xi, and again tube Xi, and then we are still using top tube and bottom tube. They don't change from one to other, but tube X does. So we are now working with tube Xi, and we also want tube offset I rather than just tube offset. Alright, so with that should now display 4 tubes all with random offset. So up and down from the center, and they should move steadily from their entire position. So the left, now run and have a look. There you go. Wonderful. The one issue that you may have noticed, of course, is that the tubes are disappearing. They are moving to the left, and then they are not doing anything else. So as I said, we need to do a check to make sure that when they get off the edge of the screen, then they shift back over to the right of the screen. So we'll do this check here. So if it's less than, we need to be a little bit careful. We cannot use 0 because then it will magically move over even when it appears on the screen there. So we actually want to use minus, and then the width of the top tube or bottom tube, it doesn't really matter which we use. So that will make sure that it is off the edge of the screen, because it will have gone to the coordinate down here somewhere, which is one tube's width to the left of the screen. So it is definitely will be fully off the screen by this point. So if that's the case, we want to shift it to the next right, and to do that we are going to take tube xi and add to it. We're going to want to 4 half screen width, because that's the total distance between our tubes. But in the general case, that's going to be number of tubes multiplied by distance between tubes, and add to it number of tubes multiplied by distance tubes. So that should shift it over to the right, the correct amount. So that is can then came back in again, and then if it is not off the edge of the screen, then we moved it to the left as we initially planned. Alright, well, that's compiling. I think that's perhaps the tubes we are slightly too close together. So let's just try changing that to instead of half the screen width, we'll change it to the 3/4 of the distance of the screen width. So just to see, it doesn't really matter, but I think that's make the game a little bit more playable. So run and have a look. Alright, so now we have got 1, 2, 3, 4. We are going to get another tubes there. So those tubes are now coming thick and fast all the way. So now we have got our tubes. We have got them hopefully a reasonable distance apart. The main thing absolutely that the game is not correctly doing is any kind of collision detection. So we absolutely want the bot to, if it hits the tubes, for the game to be over, and that's what we are going to be in the next video. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe my channel if you're not yet. Let me know if you have any question, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Take care, peace, and happy coding.